Let me bring on Kate Lincoln-Goldfinch, an immigration attorney and owner and CEO of Lincoln-Goldfinch Law. And again, going to give her some perspective. You can also follow her at Lincoln G. Finch. So, Kate, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate you taking the time.
Sure, my pleasure to be here.
Let's start off with, can Donald Trump end birthright citizenship by executive action, an executive order? Can he do that?
No. No, as you mentioned, I thought that intro and lead-up was really comprehensive and good, and this is something that's in our Constitution. It's the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. It was reviewed again by the Supreme Court in the late 1800s, and the Supreme Court issued a really clear ruling about birthright citizenship. And so if this were to change within our laws, it would require a constitutional amendment. Certainly not something that just one branch, the executive branch of the government, could do without support from Congress.
Right. And I want to get to the constitutional amendment in a minute, but look, I think the argument would be, listen, I can get this up to the Supreme Court. I think the goal would be we need a legal challenge. We need to put something out there. We need a legal challenge. We got to get it to the Supreme Court because perhaps they would be open to this idea of an executive action. And I mean, this is I agree with you. I agree with you. I think from a legal point of view, he can't just change the Constitution. But he says, listen, what happens to the argument? Look, I'm not changing the Constitution. I'm interpreting the Constitution. You know, there's that section I mentioned before, that and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Well, I don't think that means that the children of undocumented migrants or illegal citizens, they apply there. And my executive action is just clarifying that and trying to get it up to the Supreme Court, who would agree with me. What's your take on that?
Well, I don't think they would want to be in the position of arguing that undocumented people are not subject to the jurisdiction of the federal government. But I think, you know, when the Supreme Court, what happened was, so we had the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, and then in the late 1800s, something called the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed. And this was a law that said Chinese people could not immigrate or become citizens. And there was a man who was born in the U.S. to Chinese immigrant parents, and he happened to be in China when this law was passed. And he came back and wanted to reenter U.S. soil and was not allowed. He was on a boat. And he was, kept on the ship as his case went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court grappled with this exact question. Can we say that this particular person, this particular group of people, because of this law that Congress has passed, are not U.S. citizens? And they, reviewed this in the decision, and they said, well, if we were to hold that Chinese people, children of Chinese immigrants born on U.S. soil are not citizens, then how exactly are we going to handle the question of everyone else born here, to British parents, to German parents, to French parents, et cetera? And so it would be a nightmare. It would be a mess. Frankly, it was a very racist-sounding decision, but the same question remains today. If we were going to say, a certain group of people who are not born, who are born to immigrant parents in the United States aren't citizens, but then everyone else is, then where and how do you draw the line in a way that isn't just blatantly racist? I just don't think ultimately, upon review by the courts, this would ever get held up.
And you know this better than me, but wasn't that Supreme Court decision where you had Chinese parents who were lawful permanent residents, or am I wrong about that?
Well, it was so different then. Most of the Chinese immigrants who came over, were brought by the railroad companies, and so the immigration system was completely different. But again, to the first point is okay. If the argument then is that undocumented people aren't subject to this jurisdiction of the United States, imagine the potential fallout and arguments from that. It just, the ripple effect of trying to make this go would be, absurd and nightmarish, and it just ultimately doesn't make any sense. Frankly, it's just such a waste of energy and time, and it's so distracting. But here we are, having a whole conversation about it, and so I think, I'm an immigration lawyer in Texas.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, no, sorry, Kate. I'm sorry to interrupt you. There was a little delay.
Oh, my apologies. So, I'm getting calls from people as an immigration lawyer in Texas who are worried about what's coming. And there really isn't anyone that doesn't appear to be worried based on the calls that I'm fielding. People who are born here, people who have naturalized, people who have green cards. It's just, everyone is concerned about what these policies are going to mean for him. And there really is no end. If you say, okay, no one who's born in the United States is automatically a U.S. citizen anymore, then where does the line end? And no one would be safe.
I want to amplify that a little bit. I'm here with Kate Lincoln-Goldfinch, an immigration attorney and owner and CEO of Lincoln-Goldfinch Law. Clearly her phone is off the lines because this is a lot happening right now. But let me ask you, let's say, and we'll talk about Congress in a minute, but let's say we live in a world where, the 14th Amendment was revoked, or this provision of the 14th Amendment was revoked, and no, there is no longer birthright citizenship. What would our country look like? How would people be able to prove their citizenship? What happens with a number, how often do you have to prove your citizenship for a number of different form of identification and our legal process? What would that look like? What would our country look like if no longer birthright citizenship was in place?
It would be a nightmare. I mean, and can you imagine, if it were retroactive, would any of us be safe? I think it was my great-grandparents who were born here. It's like, at what point do we draw the line? And then to the questions that you raised, all of the benefits that a citizen gets upon birth. They get a Social Security number. They can have access to a U.S. passport. They get certain benefits. And so all of these benefits are now in question for everyone. And who does this review? Some baby's born at a hospital, and is the nurse supposed to go in and check the legal status of the parents? Is that the question? Do they have legal status? And what if they have green cards? Or what if they're in asylum proceedings and they have work permit? I mean, it's a nightmare. It would be a complete nightmare. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. The whole point of this is to make a lot of noise and get people really upset and worried, when the reality of the situation is that the issue of immigrants coming in just to have babies is so rare. And imagine a woman who is 8 months pregnant, who's, crossing the border, very rarely gets all the way through or even flies in on a tourist visa. It's just not a common occurrence. So we're spending potentially just an insane amount of resources and effort and energy on a non-issue. And why? Why would we do this? What's the result? Well, because it's, politically it plays very well. So I think thinking through what's a motivator behind all of this is a worthy question.
Well, I think his answer would be, look, I'm trying to curb not only illegal immigration, I'm trying to curb people taking advantage of the system. And I guess the question would be, is there legally, could he, at the minimum, could he block pregnant people from coming into the country? Is that something, we talk about what would day one of a Donald Trump administration look like, and, there's been talk about, well, the first thing we have to do is go after the criminals. Well, is another thing blocking pregnant women from coming into the country. Is that something legally he would be able to do, in your opinion?
That's something that's done now. A woman who's coming in on a tourist visa who's obviously pregnant will often just get turned away at the border or in the airport. The Border Patrol officers have a lot of power in those moments to let people in or not, and I've talked to a lot of people over the years who weren't able to come in because they were visibly pregnant. So that's what I mean. This isn't actually a really big problem. People will tell us that this is a big problem, but that's not the reality of the situation.
Let's talk about Congress for a second. The idea of trying to amend the Constitution, because while I agree with you, the executive action route probably doesn't have much success. You have to wonder, what would Congress do? And by the way, it's not only two-thirds, you need two-thirds vote in both the House and the Senate to amend the Constitution. You need ratification by 3/4 of the states. Is that a possibility given this issue? I feel like this is a losing battle because I think you would have people on both sides of the aisle who would not want this. But tell me, is this something that, I'm sure it's a discussion you've been having?
Oh, absolutely, and it seems like an actual impossibility to get what would be needed in terms of the majority in Congress and the ratification and all of that to change birthright. It's a non-starter. It's not going to happen. And so in reality, here's how I think this will actually play out. We're still going to hear noise about it. We're still going to see the Trump administration blocking passports, et cetera, Social Security for children born to immigrants. Let's say they gain information from Texas hospital records, and then they deny a group of babies, passports from the Texas hospitals. And then there'll be a lot of news, a lot of stories about that. Everybody will be talking about how Trump's ending birthright citizenship. And then some litigators are going to come in, from MALDEF or some impact organization, and they're going to represent these babies, and they're going to win in court because they're legally right. And so then those babies will get their passports, and then there'll be all this news about it, and that'll be the end of that. Like, if I were to get out my, crystal ball as an immigration lawyer, that's what is to come. Actual, problems for certain people that ultimately will get handled in court, because this won't go. This won't go in the court system where a president is trying to deny people birthright citizenship without a constitutional amendment. It's just not going to survive.
Right. Well, let me go back to that roundabout way. Putting the Constitution to the side. You don't touch the Constitution. But what about the president authorizing the Social Security Administration to not provide Social Security numbers to newborn children of undocumented migrants, or don't issue passports to those who can't prove their parents are citizens? Maybe order the agencies to not provide welfare or public benefits to whose parents are illegals. Again, I'm an immediate court challenge in all those scenarios, I imagine, to get to what the goal is that Donald Trump wants without trying to amend the Constitution.
Yes, that's what they'll do. And they will, get stopped ultimately in the courts. But there's going to be a lot of nonsense on the way. Because if you imagine, how is the, Bureau of Vital Statistics in the state of whatever going to determine that these two parents on this application for a birth certificate of this child are undocumented? This agency doesn't collect data on the legal status of the parents, and so all of a sudden ordering these state agencies to somehow collect data that they don't have access to, how are they going to do that? And then we're going to deny, so that's what I mean. It's going to be messy, and it's going to be loud, and we'll hear all about it. But what, I don't feel this way about a lot of the policy threats from the Trump administration. A lot of the stuff that they've threatened to do and said they're going to do, they will prevail. They will actually do it. Birthright citizenship is one of the ones that's clearly not within the presidential purview. So even though he can take actions that create problems for people, at the end of the day, birthright citizenship isn't going anywhere. But a lot of this other stuff, I think, will actually see some real changes.
Two questions, Kate. One, can you take phone calls with us? Because we got a lot of people calling in.
Sure.
Okay, and before we do, you mentioned that there are other parts of Donald Trump's immigration policy, I assume that's what you meant, that you think will be successful, that he will be able to get through. What do you think that is specifically?
Well, the interior deportations, for sure. They're going to start doing a lot of raids and picking people up in the interior, whereas the first administration was really focused more on the border. This time around, we're going to see more on the interior. And then the executive has a lot of power over immigration court cases and the processing of applications, so that we'll see processing times get extended. Resources will be taken from U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services so that it'll be harder to get work permits and green cards. So sort of the agency functioning behind the question of immigration is within the executive power. So it actually has quite an impact, but, it's not the law. It doesn't require the laws to change.
Gotcha. Okay, so I want to take some calls with Kate Lincoln-Goldfinch, immigration attorney, owner and CEO of Lincoln-Goldfinch Law. Let's start it up with Dave from Long Island, New York. Dave, what's on your mind when we come to this question of birthright citizenship? What do you think, Dave? Is this Dave from Long Island or Dan from California?
Hey, what's going on, Jeffrey?
Hey, sorry, we're getting a little mixed up with the phone calls. Is this Dave from Long Island or Dan from California?
Yes, it is. This is Dave from Long Island, Jeffrey.
Great, Dave from Long Island. Great, thanks. Thanks so much for coming in. Okay, so what's your question to me and Kate?
So it's not so much of a question, but I think that they should try to specifically target those coming here illegally from dropping what they used to call anchor babies, birthright citizenship. I just don't view it the same. On a green card, you're here legally, you have the baby. Yeah, I get it. I think they should make as much trouble as possible for those that are not doing it that way, whether it prevails or not. If you're delaying Social Security cards, it's a deterrent for coming in here. They should do everything they have to in order for people to obey the laws that we have in place in America, okay? It's not just to do, create business for immigration attorneys. That's how I feel, Jeffrey.
Well, Dave, I mean, you're on with an immigration attorney. So, Kate, let me hear your thoughts on what Dave had to say.
I'm curious, Dave, are you Italian?
No, believe it or not, was born in Jamaica. My parents came here legally. I was 3 years old, grew up in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, which is probably why you had the Italian coming there, because it's very Italian back then. And, no, okay? I'm of mixed heritage, mixed Jamaican heritage, Indian, black, and some white, but I was born in Jamaica, actually. So, yeah, I think everybody should come here legally. I think these people are trying to take advantage. And like I said, there's that big component of obeying the laws that we have here and how to come here legally. If they're not doing it, I say make as much trouble as possible for them, whether it prevails or not. Delay Social Security.
Kate, what do you think?
Make them yeah.
I mean, here are my thoughts. I think it would be fantastic if this nation created a system where we had ways for people to immigrate legally in a way that supports the needs of our economy. We are a growing, aging nation. Our baby boomers are going to need care. We need workers in the agriculture sector, in the engineering sector, in IT, technology. We need immigrant labor, bottom line at the end of the day. What we don't have and what we haven't had for decades, 4 decades plus, is immigration reform that passes laws that allows people to come here legally in ways that reflect the needs of our economy. So what we have created, our own selves as a nation, is a whole group of people who come here to fill the jobs that we need filled, and they violate the immigration laws because there isn't an immigration law in place that supports them. So we've done this to ourselves. So if we really want to solve this problem of having, people coming here illegally, we need to get honest with ourselves about our need for immigration and pass immigration reform, because it's really an absurdity that we need and want immigrants. There are jobs for them here. They come here and they fill them, and then we act like they're the bad guys because they've done what any human would do, which is look for a better lives for themselves and their children. How could you blame someone for that? So instead of blaming them, let's fix our laws and the problem will be solved. But nobody wants to say that on the Republican side of the aisle. And I wish everybody would get honest, because we're creating a whole bunch of nonsense and noise when the problem actually has a really simple solution.
Dave from Long Island, thank you so much. Let me go to David from San Diego. I want to go to David from San Diego as a specific question for Kate. David, what's on your mind? What's your question for Kate?
Kate, so the 14th Amendment, which was enacted with respect to the birthright citizenship issue, primarily to deal with emancipated slaves, it has a phrase in it that requires a person to be, quote, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, meaning subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, to be entitled to citizenship by birth. What in today's world, I mean, I know what the Supreme Court has said, and I agree with you. I think in the absence of either a change to the Supreme Court or constitutional amendment, it won't change. But what does that phrase mean? What did it mean at the time? I don't know if you're a constitutional lawyer. I know you're an immigration lawyer. What did it mean at the time, and why does what it meant then apply today?
Kate?
So thanks. I'm not a constitutional lawyer. I'm an immigration lawyer, but I can tell you that, the bits that I do know is that the common understanding of someone not subject to the jurisdiction of the U.S. but who is actually in the U.S. would be a diplomat, a foreign diplomat who is a subject of their own country, and their own laws would apply so that their own, criminal charges and proceedings and all of that would be under the purview of their country, not the United States. And that's why I say I don't think that the Trump administration or the U.S. would want to find itself in the position of arguing that 11 million people who are residing in the United States are not actually subject to our jurisdiction and we have no authority over them. I don't think anybody wants to be in that position. So I think it's worthy of more exploration, and this certainly is what a court case would come down to. But I, feel confident that at the end of the day, a federal court would find that undocumented people are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States when they are residing here.
Kate, I appreciate you mentioning foreign diplomats, because that's come up a lot, that they are excluded from these kind of protections from the 14th Amendment. So, okay, listen, Kate, really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much for breaking it down for us. Kate Lincoln-Goldfinch, immigration attorney, owner, CEO of Lincoln-Goldfinch Law. Thanks so much, Kate. Appreciate the time.